So a lot of amazing things have happened over the last few years. I've covered a lot of these events, and this video is not about that. A lot of terrible things have happened too, and I've covered a bunch of these things as well. I don't like echo chambers where no one questions the echoes, and I want to address some that keep bouncing around certain caves with echoes getting louder rather than softer. After hearing all the things that I'm about to talk about, it might sound like I'm saying there isn't a freedom movement. In some ways there isn't one, but an amazing jumble of events that felt like it was. And there are actual movements and structured groups and folks that formed or became stronger out of this series of events. Long game, folks. And finally, I would say we now know that hundreds of thousands of Victorians, whatever their developing or current or changing political beliefs, will take a stand for liberty, the loss of freedoms, and the suffering of self and others. We know they are there, and that if something very bad happens again, they will be back. And I will be there to film it. So yes, I'll likely make another video about some observations about the last nearly 3 years and why it is and also isn't a freedom movement. And the only goal of that video would be to separate the productive and non-productive stuff. Anyway, now on to some observations and some unproductive stuff in this video. Again, in no particular order of importance, how many subscribers will be left afterwards? Number 1. This one is very important. Many people started questioning by themselves, as is the best way, certain sinister things going on. I started questioning everything in about 2017, and many have been doing it for much longer. Many people went down new rabbit holes, and some have tunnelled so deep they dug through a hill and went off the cliff. I'll come back to off-the-cliff issues, but really want to first and foremost ask people to learn about postmodernism. I spent a lot of money and a lot of time researching and searching out the best speaker on this topic, and as a result brought Professor Stephen Hicks to Australia to provide a deep dive into the perils of postmodernism. I strongly encourage you to watch the 6 videos, totaling roughly 11 hours, also featuring Gloria Alvarez from Guatemala. But start with the one up there in the corner. The audio is rough in the first session because the venue gave me a clinically deaf sound technician. I've spoken with so many people over the last 3 years, and so many have no idea of what postmodernism is. No one's fault because it's not taught about in schools. Well, that's not true. It's actually what kids are indoctrinated with, third wave postmodernism, without the teachers even knowing. It's a big flaw in our society, and we need to really understand what it is, how it came about, in order to move forward as a more cohesive society. The best analogy is that if communism was about blowing up the house with a tank, the house being democracy, capitalism and such, postmodernism is about putting termites into the walls being institutions, academia, education, media and such, and over a much longer time, the house comes down under its own weight. 2. There's healthy questioning and skepticism that leads to research, and then questioning and more questioning, and then eradication of false information and checking in constantly on assumptions to be left with formed opinions and morsels of truth and fact. Others seem to stray from skepticism to assumption, conspiracy, straight into fact. This is everywhere from man-made climate change to chemtrails, and interestingly, a strong correlation between the two groups. I've already done some super solid videos on climate change, so chemtrails or geoengineering. Yes, it is something that exists and is possible and not surprising. People have been trying to influence the weather since the dawn of man, from rain dances, monsoon ceremonies, prayer, music, festivals, all the way to making sacrifices. Fast forward thousands of years and admire the industrial and scientific revolutions on the journey, and the train reaches its destination at the last century. We see Australian farmers shooting all sorts of rockets into the skies to bring on or prevent rain to save their crops or water their stock. As business is usually downstream from military use, yes, we see things such as the American Army trialling rain-inducing projects in Vietnam during the war. Did the experiments work? Not really. Farmers in Queensland were shooting so many rockets into the sky that it caused various problems. Legislation was brought in over the 60s. Chemtrail people keep telling me that this legislation was brought in so that the deep state government could then spray whatever they wanted into the sky to achieve all their sinister goals of land grabs, smart cities, railways, and destroy everyone's crops and cause a famine and reduce global population or prevent climate change. During the Lismore floods, people would keep sharing Robert Deutsch's video saying that a HARP mega facility down in New Zealand could shoot its cannon thing across the oceans, and this indeed is what caused the Lismore floods. This American makes detective-style videos that look only at weather radar maps. This bloke sees what is obviously a glitch of a segment of this circular radar that has been pushed slightly out of place, and boom, it's a secret station over in New Zealand that can alter the world weather and cause the Lismore floods. As much evidence needed by doomsday climate change people, really. However, as I covered the Lismore floods with Jennifer Marahasi, it was a very high amount of rain, but nothing that hasn't happened before, dating back a very long time. I keep asking for evidence, I'm open to it, so more evidence comes in. One person points me to a government website with various links of introduced GMOs, crop trials, bug trials, and medical trials, and somehow thought this meant these things were being dumped from planes, perhaps, because of them needing to be flown into Australia, introduced to the environment, and perhaps misunderstood what this meant. A waste of 45 minutes of my time because I thought finally someone has something solid. Someone else shares a 1 hour long video that combines a whole bunch of things people have said and then throws in some actual facts in there, but not to do with the chemtrails, so it sounds more legit. My takeaway from this video was that people look at the growing list of climate change science and doomsday events, which is almost always false, and they believe this, but instead think that it's all geoengineered and brought about by chemtrails and such. Yes, I understand it has been proposed by the Gates people and other people in the past to change the atmosphere to save the planet from climate change through deploying various and continuous substances into the atmosphere. But this does not mean that every time you see a trail in the sky, it is part of a massive effort to do this. Or every time you see an unusual cloud pattern, it is the result of a deep state conspiracy. Yes, you can hire the services of a company and try and change a little bit of weather for a certain event. The Beatles did this when they played once for the Queen. Did it work? Well, it works if the weather plays out like you paid it to. But often it doesn't, as it didn't for all those farmers shooting rockets into other people's properties back in the 50s. The people and influencers who push this fear without any evidence and 100% assumption are perhaps as bad as the COVID fearmongers who propagated unnecessary fear over the last 2.5 years. Fear without evidence or proof, and false evidence that is simply the result, for many, of living in an echo chamber. Question your belief in this harder. Also, occasionally, a trail can be left with the dumping of fuel for OH&S reasons and landing with only a minimal amount of fuel. Not healthy, but it's not conspiracy. Just as I've asked man-made climate change people for evidence over the years, and it generally always falls apart at the seams after a small amount of research, I started asking chemtrail people for evidence, and it's pretty much the same scenario. Number 3, the Freemasons. My goodness, it was so annoying to be filming and have someone standing next to me constantly shouting, "All Freemasons are pedophiles." That's like saying all teachers are pedophiles or all tradies are, because inevitably, with so many in a group, there are going to be both male and female bad ones. or the same for any group that has hundreds of thousands or millions of members. Do some research on the Freemasons and get out of this echo chamber. Why did they start? Because they travelled around the world building things. They were masons. They were influenced by all types of cultures and no longer were happy with the strictness of the Roman Catholic Church and the way that they persecuted non-Catholics. Their creed was basically to create a brotherhood that was accepting of different faiths and belief systems, do good stuff for the society they lived in, and achieve degrees to basically become better people. As with all movements, factions break off and develop over time. Certain elements get corrupted, and some people started lodges which have a crazy amount of degrees. And some things get pretty weird, and yes, there will be a portion of corrupt and terrible people. But the majority did and still stick to the basic 3 degrees. Think of Christians who stick to the teachings of Jesus and built hospitals and lots of good stuff compared to all the weird little sects and cults that pretend to follow the teachings of Jesus. You had normie Freemasons turning up to protests, and they were greeted by someone on a loudspeaker accusing them all of being pedophiles. Just speak to one, and you'll find that Freemasons are probably not for you, because you spend years going to weekly meetings that are rather dull and structured as they talk about other members, things they are doing to help society, and there's no real discussion about religion or politics, and then they go back to their families and working week. Meetings sound rather boring to me, but for most people provide a sense of brotherhood or a day to escape their common life. Certain conspiracies about the Freemasons eventuated because of a propaganda book that was written to discredit a Freemason who was running as a Republican politician in America. Where have we seen that in modern times? And although the authors came out afterwards and said they made it all up, the book was and continues to be used as a fact of sinister goings-on in the Freemason tribe. The people who seem to constantly see sinister things everywhere and somehow link everything to the Freemasons are the very ones who think everything in society is corrupt and leads to rigged elections, such as the rigged election we're just supposed to have had. Their solution is to start a parallel society that will move away from corruption and everything bad going on into some kind of utopia. They don't yet realise that their unwritten manifestos of their new parallel societies reflect the ethics and morals of the Freemasons, which was itself a parallel movement centuries ago. I mean, even Mozart was a Freemason. Obviously, he didn't build buildings or work with stone because this was after the Freemasons moved away from just being Masons. Mozart's societal contribution, as was common for Freemasons adopting the new Enlightenment movement at the time, a parallel movement, was to provide his skills as a composer, and he wrote plays and musicals that the common poor person could afford to attend. He no longer wrote operas and ballets just for the elite, as was the societal norm at the time. Freemasons also copped a lot of flack from Roman Catholics because they were a threat to their monopoly on culture, power, and riches. Yes, some things about the 33rd degree Freemasons are odd and corrupt and sinister, as would happen to any parallel movement over centuries. But to believe all Freemasonry is corrupt and satanic leads people to falsely label someone like Craig Kelly as one of these, because they did some amazing and truly remarkable detective work and paused a video where his hands were held in a typical contemplative fashion just before he was about to give a speech. And bingo! I'll tell my 70,000 viewers that he is one of these satanic worshipping Freemasons. I said g'day to Craig in Canberra, and the person saying hello before me was just wanting to make sure that he wasn't actually a Freemason because they were following someone who said that he sure looked like one. I met two oddballs in Canberra who wanted me to film them talking about all the statues there and how they all obviously represented the work of Freemason pedophiles. I'll concede that there is one very odd statue in Canberra, but then they went to a sheep sitting on a barber's seat that was about to get a haircut from another sheep, and because it was sitting on its back, like a human would sit on the chair, it was obviously made by pedophile Freemasons. Okay, so it has nothing to do with the fact that this region eventuated literally off the back of the sheep industry. So for those who believe that the Freemasons, the original construction workers, the original tradies, are all pedophiles, get out of your comfort zone and go and talk to a few. You will probably dismiss yourself from the conversation about Freemasons so that you don't waste any more of your day. 4. And while on this, you saw many screaming their lungs off about pedophiles and the 28 and the suppression order and all Freemasons are pedophiles while simultaneously dancing to Michael Jackson music. Maybe they need to chill out a bit more with some Netflix and watch Leaving Neverland about Michael Jackson. 5. The numbers people. People had solved the problem and identified the culprits of everything we've been through because they looked at the many thousands of articles around the world that are printed daily on statistics and cases. One town in Timbuktu, one state in America, one pokey little community in Azerbaijan, and amazingly found several that had relevance to satanic numbers, which proved everything. 6. These parallel movement people didn't vote and won't vote. They couldn't even spend 1 hour to go out of their way to cast a vote and even just give it a chance, why not? 7. A smallish number of people in Canberra were convinced that the loudspeaker systems used by the federal police were also shooting weaponised rays at people that burnt their skin and made them sick. Okay, even Malcolm Roberts had asked about this in a hearing with the federal police, who interestingly didn't immediately dismiss it. Why? Because it is possible to use these LRADs as weapons. Okay, but were they used this way? Maybe people were getting sunburnt because it was bloody hot up there, and then the next day there was a lightning storm and it was pouring rain and people got drenched and we were generally outside all day. Maybe people were getting sick because hundreds of thousands of Australians have travelled from vastly different regions and different climates with different viruses and bugs and spent weeks hugging and kissing strangers while living in different sanitary conditions, using all the same spaces, toilets and showers. There were tons of families there with kids, and for anyone that has ever worked in a school, you know that there are a lot of germs about and that kids are always getting sick and spreading things. It was an absolutely amazing experience though to walk up to Canberra House with hundreds of thousands of people, Australian flags as far as the eye could see. I do get that because of what Victorians had months before experienced with Victorian police, that it's not a great leap to think that federal police would use any means necessary to disperse protesters. But all it is assumption. 8. Many protesters in Melbourne would carry the flag of another country, their country, original country, and only that flag. It was very unique and very interesting to see. But I also came to realise that many migrants don't even know something as basic as the Aussie, 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 oi, oi, oi chant. You are in Australia now. At least put the Aussie flag or the boxing kangaroo on the same flagpole. My ancestry is Irish, as is the ancestry of many Australians, but we don't carry the Irish flag. And for those who carry the Aboriginal flag, convinced that all Australians came from colonisers and white people are bad, understand that the Irish were the first political prisoners here, taken from Ireland and England because they were protesting against the English. They were taken from their land, their culture, their kids, and dumped somewhere they didn't want to be. Some even went to live with Aboriginal tribes after escaping British labour camps. Many died on the way over, and the ones who survived were forced to speak English and were shot dead if they tried to go back to see their kids and live in their original land. Anyway, my point is, at least learn a simple chant or show Australian pride in some recognisable way, and while I'm at it, talk to Aboriginal people across Australia, and you will quickly learn that many are proud to be Australian and are proud of their mixed heritage, and think that the whiteys who constantly think that Aboriginal people always need special conditions and a hand up is an extremely racist perspective. 9. You had people going to protests, shouting at the common man in the street about the World Economic Forum. I mean, start somewhere relatable, for goodness sake. How about start with ideas of liberty or the suffering of children, then slowly ease into introducing something odd that the World Economic Forum is doing. Get them questioning something, anything. Don't froth at the mouth while shouting down at people about something they won't be able to relate to or latch onto in any way. Often it's something very small and simple that gets someone thinking, and people need to take new information in at an individualistic level. Bite-sized chunks before they start down various rabbit holes. 10. The assumption that everyone in the freedom movement is going to get along and not disagree on anything. Outside of people coming together for massive protests against government overreach, lockdowns causing more harm than good, loss of liberty, and all the consequences that upended so many people's lives, there's not much in common. Protesters had all kinds of different political views, and pretty much everything has been politicised. People en masse don't really want to spend time protesting and just want to live their own lives, and came together out of necessity. Massive protests could happen again with certain catalysts, but the unifying factors are slim and need to stay on point. 11. Because protests are super organic and anyone can attend and anyone can hold a microphone, there was a constant loss on the focus and purposes because of certain people not sticking to the point. The loss of liberty, increased suffering, people were constantly bringing in unrelated topics to these and off-the-cliff conspiracies, and trying to get their 2 minutes on the microphone to talk about the Freemasons or this or that. Keep it simple and remember that everyone doesn't share your opinion, and think, is it directly relevant to the current issue? 12. People have constantly been worried about the internal politics among certain groups and movements and individuals and such. Fret, but don't fret. If you look at any movement in the past, it's always been there. Go to a communism conference and you will see the same thing there. Comrades constantly disagreeing on how to move forward. I say fret because if you look at freedom movements or uprisings about power overreach in Old England centuries ago, the authorities basically ended up leaving the movement to dissolve from within because of the infighting. But on the opposite end, amazing accomplishments have come out of previous liberty movements. For the people who say there is no point in protesting, perhaps ask yourself why so much consistent and very, very expensive effort was put into extinguishing any form of protest for over a year by the Victorian Police. 13. There are whingers out there who seem to find fault in everything that everybody does while not doing much at all themselves. You are not helping, go away. 14. There are people who want to be the face of. 15. There were some who assumed themselves as leaders somehow. They spoke with authority in telling people what they should do, where they should go, that they should leave Canberra and come back in a month, how they should behave, while spouting about the loss of liberty and the breakdowns in our democracy. But they never asked people for their opinions, and they never took votes from large crowds or small crowds of people on pretty basic and essential decisions that they made on behalf of everyone. Learn to be humble and have the wisdom to see that you are not a leader or only the leader of a small group. 16. The QAnon stuff. I think most people have woken up to it now. This idea that something big is going to happen that's going to change the world doesn't happen. Time goes on. Oh, now it's really going to happen. Still doesn't happen. And so on and so forth. And just nothing ever happens. I met one QAnon person along the way, and that was about it. This guy had lost everything in his life because of the mandates and lockdowns and still believes Trump is working for a secret QAnon society group who have a master plan, who allowed for all the societal destruction as a means to an end because things have to get worse and all the sinister people have to be exposed and will be exposed and judgment will finally come about and it's all worth it. Here's the reality of those secret freedom and liberty-loving societies. They're not very secret and they've been around for quite a while. I was invited to one of these special worldwide society events called the Mont Pelerin Society. And yes, you have to be invited to attend and only so many delegates can attend from each country. It was a conference of rather typical conference-style speeches and pretty much a talk fest. It basically comes down to individuals and small groups, think tanks, liberty groups and such, supported by the common man and also wealthier people who come from around the world and are making real changes on a societal level and discuss it at the conference. They are all up against it and some are having great successes in their respective regions. The Mont Pelerin Society was set up back in the 60s to counter the communists and sinister groups who were having success in infiltrating societal institutions, schools, media and politics. I explained this to this QAnon man. "Oh no," was the rebuttal, "it's because the QAnon people are allowing them to do such things, which is why they are happening. They're allowing you to film the protests and make videos. Otherwise you wouldn't be able to do it." Well, it would be great if they actually allowed me to make videos by throwing some financial support my way. Otherwise they're pretty useless. 17. More on echo chambers. Now, I don't mean meet-up groups and like-minded groups that were very, very necessary for people to understand that they are not alone and it gave them a restored sense of community and humanity. These were and are important for mental health and social connections, especially for all the black sheep with a healthy sense of skepticism. But echo chambers in the sense that anything that is brought up by the group leader or influencer goes unquestioned and is accepted as fact or reality. Some folks with audiences just straight out lie to their followers, keeping whatever needs to be kept alive to bring in more donations or more followers or more views, and then oust anyone who questions the echo. Others don't lie, but make claims based solely on assumptions. 18. You have kids out there who are already fearful of so many things. Imagine being the adult in the room and you're like, "I have to warn the next generation about climate change. And by the time they've finished school, it's all too late because the world is ending." And you tell this to a group of very innocent kids who basically believe anything you tell them. You are scaring the crap out of them. They immediately start to exhibit anxiety and question the point of the human race and think, "What's the point? Stop it." Or you tell them that they have to do all this medical stuff because if they don't, people are going to die and so many people are dying and you have to stay locked up at home to be doing the right thing. Otherwise, you will be responsible for killing people and your grandparents. Kids believed that they were in something equivalent to the Black Plague and that the end of humanity is nigh. Well, it's the same for people who are telling kids that there are nanobots in these injections, or it's to cull the entire population, or the deep state government is filling the skies with poison to reduce the population. Stop giving kids anxiety because of your assumptions mixed in with some fact. And if anything, if you really wanted to do sinister stuff, humanity around the world has just been reminded that all you need is a good old propaganda and fear of death and a longer campaign that the world is ending due to humans living, which has been recycled time and time again for millennia. You don't need chemtrails to destroy crops and land where farmers can straight out be stopped from growing crops, as is happening to the Dutch farmers right now. I might do another video on the freedom movement and why all these things that happened over the last 2 years doesn't really constitute a movement. And this is no way to discredit the amazing things that we actually saw over the 2 years. But it can't really move forward as a movement by just lumping everything that happened as one solid and purposeful movement. But what I would say is that we now know that hundreds of thousands of Victorians, whatever their current political beliefs, will take a stand for liberty. But for now, I have to make a video about China. Peace out, Sam.